Josh Brown, are you ready for 19 inches of video games?
Every day I am. Every single day I am ready for 19 inches of video games. Scott Tilford.
As well you should be. There are plenty of games to play right now. There are plenty more games coming in the future. And alongside them are hot, spicy rumors, leaks, etc. to talk about. We've rounded up 8 of the best ones. We're going to tandem these, go back and forward, and get through all of the details, all the sources, all the things that verify them, I would say, to some degree. It's more fun if you just go along with it. If you just treat these as things that could come true.
Some of them are crazy.
Yes.
Some of them are more believable, but we'll get to that when we get into the entries.
We will. I'm Scott.
I'm Josh.
From WhatCulture.com, and these are the 8 craziest video game rumors that could come true. Number 8, the Switch 2's power is actually insane. This comes from Video Games Chronicle, Jez Corden over on Windows Central, and Eurogamer, etc., saying that the next Nintendo Switch model was shown off behind closed doors at Gamescom 2023, not only running an Unreal Engine 5 game, but the Matrix Awakens lifelike tech demo from 2021. Also thrown in here are details of 12 gigs of RAM and the ability for ray-traced games. Now, notorious Future Game Show / WhatCulture Gaming egg Jules Gale also reports that he saw enforced security around a walled-off area of the Nintendo press booth when backstage at Gamescom, further increasing speculation.
You know, this leak is surprising, but I also think it makes sense. You know, if we're ranking these rumors in terms of how much we believe them, one, I think the sources involved are really credible. You know, Eurogamer, VGC, a load more that you reeled off, you know, all corroborating similar things.
Incredible.
And two, because they've mentioned, you know, in the ongoing saga with Activision Blizzard and Microsoft and that acquisition, Microsoft and Activision have both mentioned that Call of Duty, for instance, will be on the next Nintendo machine, and they'll need something more powerful than the Switch currently is to get the likes of Call of Duty running and other third-party titles that they seem to want on their next console. So all of that in mind, this is getting me excited, and I'm kind of believing it.
Gotta make Call of Duty work somehow.
Number 7. Red Dead Redemption 3 is happening. Scott Telford, we covered the news a little while ago that Red Dead Redemption 3 is reportedly in development. And that kind of sounds crazy, considering we don't even know when Grand Theft Auto 6 is arriving at the time of recording anyway. It'll probably drop once we get this live, as our luck always goes. But yes, according to leaker My Time to Shine H, Red Dead Redemption 3 is in development. This was written up on Insider Gaming, and in their report, they also suggest that it's likely at least 6 or 7 years away from release. I think that's quite a conservative estimate. I don't think we'll get to see this game until well into the 2030s, because it's going to take GTA 6 a long time to come around. Then they're going to spend a lot of time developing the next game, and I don't think they will have split the studios or anything like that, but that's just my conjecture. But we have heard other stuff about Red Dead Redemption's future, because VGC wrote up an interview that he did during the Jefferies Virtual Global Interactive Entertainment Conference, where he was talking about his big franchises, and he referred to Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption specifically as essentially eternal franchises that will always continue and get new installments. He, in fact, referred to them as being similar to James Bond in nature, which, if you're not much of a movie fan, James Bond has existed for like 50 years and obviously has received many, many sequels and has continued to live. So, whether it's in development now or not, we are definitely getting a Red Dead Redemption 3 at some point. The question just is, will we get it before Elder Scrolls 6?
Number 6, Bethesda are remaking Elder Scrolls 6 Oblivion.
What?
Am I doing this voice for everything? Every single rumor? Yeah, apparently. And also, it's been I'm doing it again. It's been 16 years since Oblivion.
I feel so old. I feel like ancient.
Oblivion's past being a teenager.
Don't say that to me.
I'll stop going up at the end of every sentence, but we'll get through this. Obviously, one of the most beloved entries in the Elder Scrolls franchise, the idea of an Oblivion remake has done the rounds for years, leading to a recent leak from someone claiming to be an ex-employee from Studio Virtuous, saying that the remake was indeed true and would be coming before 2025. Now, at this point, neither Bethesda or Microsoft have denied this, which is quite telling in itself, and it is worth saying that with Starfield, Bethesda have shown that they can create a relatively bug-free experience on the Creation Engine, which itself was upgraded from the Gamebryo engine, which was the guts that Oblivion ran on in 2006, Josh.
Don't say it again. Don't say it again.
Ultimately, I think because Bethesda are now signed with Xbox / Microsoft, and they just have a dedicated platform to make this for, which I guess, like, you know, you can infer that this would be a platform-exclusive remake of Oblivion, assuming, like I said, lots of assumptions here, it would just be a nice little game, nice little upgrade, visual overhaul, make it work.
I know people are kind of sick of remasters at this point. I mean, just look at the announcement of the Red Dead Redemption original remaster, if you can call it that. It's more of a port coming to PlayStation, but I love those old Bethesda games. I'm kind of greedy, but I want to see remasters of, or remakes of Oblivion. I want to see remasters or remakes of Fallout 3, of Fallout New Vegas, which I know is Obsidian, in all of their back catalog, because I think there's just, I want to see how they play with modernized controls. I want to see how they play with modernized combat, especially in the cases of Fallout and Oblivion, which are way floatier and don't really work as action games in the way that Skyrim or Starfield or even Fallout 4 does. So I think there's a lot of potential to go back. Obviously, they're all backwards compatible anyway, so you get good experiences of these games. But Oblivion is a fan favorite for me personally. It's kind of one of the games that got me into RPGs to begin with. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, and I would like to see it return. Number 5, Gears 6 will be more open world. Now, this is quite a straightforward one. This comes by way of Nick Baker of the Xbox Era podcast, as was written up on Insider Gaming, who claimed that Gears 6 will not be a fully open world game, but will be, quote, almost an open world game. And to me, this makes a lot of sense, because Gears 5, if you remember, already dabbled in this to a certain degree. It was certainly the most open Gears game we've ever got.
It was almost a Gears of War game.
It was one of the best Gears of War games, Scott Telford. It had the linear levels of classic Gears titles, but it also had what I would describe as more God of War 2018 inspired areas, where they weren't open worlds, but they were bigger hub areas that you could explore, be that on foot or via vehicles. And I really enjoyed that element. It gave the gameplay a little bit more flair, a little bit more variety, but it was small enough for those areas to remain highly detailed and highly authored. So going into Gears 6, I think the foundation is already there, and to me that's the natural evolution of that franchise. Don't go completely open world, but like Nick Baker says here, almost open world in the vein of something like God of War Ragnarok. To me, it's a really good move.
I think it's cool if you can make the exploration rewarding. I always thought that the idea of having little pockets of Gears of War interaction across an open world is a cool idea. That was the best thing about Gears 5. But I always found that once I fought my way through those encounters, what I was getting at the end was very little. I wasn't really working on building up as a character or characters in general in any sort of meaningful way. You did get more abilities for Jack, your floating companion. It just didn't feel like I needed to do that stuff. I can still, which is an interesting split, because I do also just want a Gears of War campaign. I like the straightforward nature of them to a degree, so I think they do need to try and find that balance to make sure that it works for old school fans and bringing in new people. I don't think you can just arbitrarily go, we're going open world now, and it works. I think it needs to almost be a Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain thing, where you've fully committed to it, and you design gameplay systems around the open world nature of it. Maybe you tackle things in different orders, maybe there's different ways that you infiltrate bases or things like that, and bulk out the cover systems themselves. Give us new ways to approach enemies, drag them back over cover, whatever. Like it was just really, really cool, and I just want that feeling of gameplay first to come back. Number 4, God of War Ragnarok's DLC is apparently 60% complete. What about the horn, Josh? Have you got the horn? Have I got the horn? Can we procure a horn?
I do not want 19 inches of horn, please, from this DLC. Nor do I need to know what you're implying there, which is who blew the horn in God of War 2018.
I don't even know if Cory Barlog himself, beloved man that he is, knows who blew the horn. One of the biggest plot dangling threads in the original 2018's God of War is who blew the horn in the background when you're out exploring with Kratos and Atreus, and that wasn't addressed in God of War Ragnarok. It was one of the biggest talked about fan theory things going into that game, and post-launch for Ragnarok, Cory Barlog got out there and just said, look, that's a story for another game. Don't worry about it. We'll get there eventually. And it was already known that God of War Ragnarok is in itself ostensibly stitching together what could have been God of War 2 and 3. The initial plans were to do a trilogy, and so I always kind of thought that, yes, it's a story for another game if you want to get there eventually, but now we are getting God of War Ragnarok DLC, so do they do a horn story?
I think it's got to be the swan song for this entire era, right? Because I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like this sort of Norse mythology version of God of War is kind of nicely wrapped up, and I would like to see other eras, other mythologies get center stage in a proper God of War sequel. So I like the idea of, yeah, if you want to, you can go back and answer the unanswered questions from the first 2 games, but just generally, I want to kind of see a nice bow tied on this entire era, a victory lap, if you will, of what God of War and God of War Ragnarok has brought to the table.
A nice bow, but not a bow and arrow. I want to play as Kratos, not Atreus.
Number 3, GTA 6 will cost $150?
Of course it will. Of course it will. It's been in development for 10 years now?
At least at this point. No, I've thrown this one in because honestly, I don't think there's much to this. I've just seen it do the rounds all over my social media to the point where it's been inescapable. Headlines saying that GTA 6 will cost as much as $150 just for the base game. So I did a little bit of digging on this, and it seems like it started from a site called Niche Gamer, who reported that there were rumors that the game will be priced at $150 to apparently offset a rumored $1 billion budget, which would be double that of Red Dead Redemption 2's, which came in just over $500 million, I think. Now, I've thrown this in here because everyone is ravenous for GTA 6 details of any kind, and I do think that if there is one franchise that could take the piss and just charge people an obscene amount for its next installment, it would be GTA. That said, do I think it's going to be this outlandish? I don't think so. I don't think there's too much to this rumor, but I do think it's important to talk about the fact that costs are increasing. We've already seen game prices jump from $60 to $70, and as game budgets get way more inflated, which I absolutely imagine that GTA 6 will be costing around this, maybe not that high, but certainly is going to cost a lot of money, that we will see in turn game prices increasing. Just, I don't think this much.
Number 2, Final Fantasy 9 and 10 remakes are coming between now and 2025. This is reported by various sources over the years, but a recent update from reputable leaker I'm a Hero 2 noted that Final Fantasy X's remake has a skeleton crew, as Square Enix are going back and forth on release dates, but do appear to be remaking Final Fantasy 9 and 10. The idea of a Final Fantasy 9 remake, I mean, it's been done a few times before. There were mentions of Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 remakes in the early 2000s, and there was that tech demo that was then shown off to highlight what the PlayStation 3 could do. So the idea of remaking the classic Final Fantasies, the golden era, you might say. The idea of revisiting that era has always been something Square Enix seems to bring out every few years. I wouldn't put it past them remaking 9, considering how well 7's done. If you sort of spread out the Final Fantasy franchise and look at the most positively received ones, the ones that are the most viable for these high-end remakes, 9 would be the one after 7 to go to. However, if they do this, I don't think it'll be anywhere near the amount of effort that's been put into 7, because 7 is like its own little cottage industry inside Square Enix. Like, as we record this, Final Fantasy Ever Crisis is coming out on mobile, and that's like another gacha loot system retelling of Final Fantasy VII's story, where you can pay money to put different skins on characters and put different characters in different parts of the timeline that they weren't in before, alongside fleshing out Sephiroth's story as a young soldier that none of us asked for. But
especially not me.
No, not me. You've got to do something with the mysterious character. Let's just make him less mysterious. But when it comes to Final Fantasy overall, like I said, if you're going to pick those games that have the immediate, I kind of wonder what they do with it, response, it's going to be the likes of Final Fantasy 9. 10 was the end of that golden era. Some people really hate 10. The story's kind of all over the place. I, for one, absolutely love 10, even though I do also agree the story is all over the place. But still, the idea of getting 2 more high-end remakes, just skipping over 8, never bother with 8.
Number 1, The Last of Us Part 3 starts filming this year. Now, Scott, there have been Last of Us Part 3 rumors swirling all year. I think the release of the HBO show and the amount of interviews that Neil Druckmann and co-showrunner Craig Mazin have been doing have led a lot of people to ask Neil Druckmann about the prospect of a third game, because we know there's going to be a second season of the show that's going to start adapting the second game, and presumably the third game is going to be made to round all of this stuff off, or at least that's what the rumors seem to suggest. And leaker Viewer Anon even claims that mocap filming on Part 3 is actually happening this year, and that Ellie will once again be a main character. Not necessarily the only main character, but Ellie will be back and her story will be continued. There are a few other leaks as well. Daniel RPK, who's usually known for movies, also shared some details about new characters, though it is a little bit confusing whether these characters are going to be in The Last of Us Part 3 or whether they're going to be included in The Last of Us Factions, because there have been a whole other section of rumors about The Last of Us Factions, which, if you don't know, is the multiplayer game that was delayed earlier this year. And there was a quote from the composer of The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 who said that he'd been doing work on a new version of Part 2, so we might get a remaster or director's cut of that. The Last of Us fever is absolutely hitting. The show was a huge success, and I feel like, to me personally, it seems like that it's inevitable that Part 3 is in the fires in one way or another.
It makes sense. I think as much as Last of Us Part 2 was obviously divisive and whatever, it still sold incredibly well. There are still phenomenal discussions that came out of that game's story. Just actually play it and then talk about the game and see what you think. But the way that game ends, not to go into specific spoilers, does leave it open for a third installment. You could take it as the end of the Last of Us franchise if you want, the end of that overall story and the end of Ellie's journey. I always wanted it to come back around again. I always wanted that third installment. I want to see what happens next. And especially for Ellie, if you think of the Last of Us franchise as Ellie's story, as much as it obviously is Joel, but it's Joel's influence on Ellie, and then it's what happens with Abby, and it's her experiences with Dina, and it's what shapes that person over time. I want to know the next bit. That I just hope they put enough of a stamp on it where it's like, cool, we got one of the greatest trilogies of all time, and then they just kind of leave it. I don't want any of this eternal franchising of stuff.
Yes.
And I know that Big Jim Ryan just wants another game, man. Just make another one. He can't help himself, but at the same time, or just remake it, he'll just sell it again. I would rather that you put the authoritative stamp on it and especially when you've got Neil Druckmann, Hallie Gross, the specific team members that got it off the ground. Sadly, Bruce Straley's not working at Naughty Dog anymore, because he was instrumental as part of Last of Us Part 1, but I just want that team to round it out and do it properly and then just leave it, let things be.
Yep, it does seem like it's going to be a case of when rather than if, because even a few years ago, I think it was in 2021, when Neil Druckmann said that he had an outline for a potential Part 3 and would potentially make it one day if the passion was there. And given how much he's been talking about The Last of Us with the show in these interviews, like I said, it's very clear that he's still passionate about this franchise, at least to my eyes. I think the big question is, will The Last of Us Part 3 be his next project, or will something else happen in between? Because he has confirmed that he's working on something, but he hasn't said that it's in this universe. So do we get a new IP before we get the trilogy capper, or do we get the trilogy capper, leave it behind like you said, and then move on to something else? I think that's the big question right now.
They said Last of Us 1 was about love, Last of Us 2 was about hate. What's Last of Us 3 going to be about?
It's about 19 inches of venom.
And with that note, those have been the craziest video game rumors that could come true. Let us know what you think of them down in the comments below. Maybe there are some myths that you can suggest as well. It's also worth saying that if you enjoy the back and forth that me and Josh have here now, you like this style of conversation and video game coverage, please subscribe to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. We have 3 shows every week, lots of conversations between myself and Josh, and we would massively appreciate the sub. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
Please check out the video on screen right now. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll catch you very soon.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.